Hopefully everybody is fueled up or is fueling up, and that you have your questions ready for Bruce and Heather, and your thoughts. They certainly are going to share some interesting and inspiring details about the progress that they're making with this plan. And by way of just a slight overview, for some of you may not be familiar with the process that's going on. Very few businesses, right, or organizations or even communities would embark on any long-term project without a detailed plan of what the goals are and the strategies and tactics to achieve them and the metrics for measuring success, right? Well, Maine is no different when it comes to economic development. Governor Mills has tasked Heather Johnson, the Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, and Bruce Wagner, the CEO of the Finance Authority of Maine, or FAME as we like to call it, with managing the development of a 10-year strategic economic development plan for Maine. Bruce and Heather were kind enough to join us today. They're on a really tight deadline. It's November 15th, right?
That's right.
And I think there may have been some efforts by some people in this room to maybe extend that deadline. And I don't think we're going to get to extend that deadline, are we? So we really appreciate your time. We appreciate your candor. We had a prep conversation, and you're going to see they're very candid about the opportunities and the challenges and the progress so far. So without further ado, I've been in a couple of the listening sessions and many of the people in this, if you've been to any of the planning or listening sessions, raise your hand.
Wow.
Thank you.
And so I think you'll all appreciate and agree with that we've heard a little bit about the strategic plan and the form that it's starting to take and the goals and strategies that are starting to be identified. And it struck me that these are often goals and strategies that we have debated as a state for decades, certainly years. And so I guess the number one question on everyone's mind is, are you hearing and incorporating truly innovative approaches that will enable us to move beyond discussing and debating them and into solving and addressing the challenges and meeting the opportunities, right?
So I guess, you want me to go first?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So first off, for all of you who have come to one of our sessions, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We know that that's a big time commitment and a lot to ask of people. We also are trying to get different and diverse thoughts into this plan so that it's not a plan done somewhere and then everybody finds out what's happening, right? It's a really engaged plan. I think in order to get these innovative and unique ideas, we need to listen to people from a variety of different areas, right? The private sector, nonprofits, economic development groups, community leaders, and the like. We've also gone outside the state to look at best practices in other states as well to try to figure out where are things working, what do we need to do to make them work here. So to answer your question, is it going to be different or not? I think yes. The thing I would also caution though is there's no magic in an economic development plan, right? Economic plans take time. They are thoughtful in their development. And there are things I think you'll see in this plan that are just the next step, right? They're evolutionary around things you've seen before. How do we do it better? How do we do it more effectively? How do we do it in line with some of the governor's climate goals and some of our workforce challenges? What do those look like, and how do they take shape as you evolve kind of our economy? And then what I hope you'll see are a couple of transformational things, because the reality is, right, if you're going to tackle some transformational things, you're likely only going to be able to tackle one or two at a time with the types of resources a state like ours has. And so our job, as we see it, is to create this roadmap that we hope will get implemented across the state. The state doesn't have enough resources to do the implementation. We need to plug in, and the reason to create the roadmap is to plug into resources across the state and start to tackle some of these things. But from a transformational perspective, we need to be really focused and be good at what we decide to do and win there and then go to the next thing and be good at that. So, you won't see 1,000 things. You'll see a couple of things. You'll see evolutionary things, kind of in a broad range, but then you'll see a couple of more transformational things that give us a chance to really dig our heels in on, get good at, and then move to the next thing. Bruce,
Yeah, I would just add, we think about some of the core concepts that are behind this plan may be familiar, but the thing I would comment, and anybody who's ever worked with me in the past, they've heard this a lot, a good deployment plan, well deployed, beats a great plan that's not deployed or poorly deployed. And so a lot of what we have tried to construct is a plan that can be executed, that we can assign accountability for exactly who's going to do what, have timeframes for those commitments, and really ratchet progress forward. So if I think about one difference in the plan, I think Dwight Eisenhower also made the comment, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. And I really believe that as we've gone about this. As Heather commented, we've involved a lot of people. I think today, being with you today would bring us well over 1,000 people that we've met with during the course of this project. And at this point, we also have over 50 people working hard on the strategies to bring things together for the 15th. So it really is an intense team effort to bring this together, and a statewide effort.
And Bruce, you've talked a lot about how identifying the what is one phase, but now you're moving into the how. And are there any examples you can give of either the, the incremental tactics or strategies, and then or examples of here's the big leap? Go ahead.
Okay, one that jumps to mind, but it's actually in Heather's area of expertise, so I hesitate, but we look at broadband as being a core infrastructural requirement for both economic growth and educational deployment through the state. We have a rural state. How do you bring people in from rural areas to efficiently educate them? How do we connect businesses in a way that we're connected to the globe? We're really in a worldwide economy. So one of the primary barriers is going to be how we fund that. So we have a team working on that. Many people from that team are in the room. One idea they came up with that we're looking very hard at right now is to use the processes that my own organization, the Finance Authority of Maine, does so well, which is we take risk by providing a loan guarantee to a bank to do the financing for something like a broadband expansion. So instead of having to fund the broadband expansion straight up, could you enhance the risk for private capitalists to come in and borrow that money, and then all you would need would be the reserves to back up on the loan guarantee, so it's an efficient mechanism to do that with. I'd comment, one of the things that's worked well, and I'll put a little plug in on FAME, we have around $35 million in reserves right now, but in the 35 years of our existence, we've turned that over so many times, we've generated well over $1 billion in loans. You could apply some of these same concepts to broadband, and so that's one very specific way. We have an existing infrastructure, we have a process that's worked well, we understand about taking risk, and we strategically understand the importance of broadband.
Great example. Were there any examples you wanted to give?
I think maybe the other one that kind of leaps out to us is workforce, right? Everywhere we go, and I'm sure everywhere you all go, workforce is kind of top of mind, and there are a lot of pieces to that, right? How do we grow our workforce? There are a lot of ways to do that, and so while the plan is underway and not fully completed, some obvious things come out around types of opportunities that we have, and so we're going to actually pilot some marketing work as it relates to workforce in this fall, and it'll actually launch before the plan is complete. So it became clear that there was a need. It became clear that there were 2 or 3 things we might want to pilot. So it gives us a chance, even in parallel, to get that work moving instead of doing everything in a serial fashion.
Kind of marketing along the lines of live, work, and play in Maine.
Yeah, so if you think about our easiest people to attract are people who have some connection to Maine, which we call the boomerang campaign. And so you assume that a lot of those folks will be home between sometime in the middle of November and the end of the year, visiting family, potentially home for some kind of vacation or holiday. And so to kind of look at this a couple of different ways on how do we market to those folks and talk to them about economic opportunity here, right? Because they may in that moment want to move back and it may be an easy discussion to have. We also are looking at arming their families. So grandparents, we talk about ourselves being the oldest state in the country. Who wants to say no to their grandmother? Right? Nobody. So if you can arm the grandparents and the parents with information about, look at all these great economic opportunities, whether they're in our town or the nearby town or another town, there's real ways to connect to people as they're here and improve our ability to keep them here.
So workforce development and the workforce gap, the skills gap, that is probably, raise your hand if that's the number one concern or challenge for your organization, your community.
Quite a few.
That's what, at MDF, pretty much all roads lead back to workforce development, education and workforce development at some level. Can you talk a little bit more about how the plan and the tactics that you're identifying will address that and not only overcome the skills and people gap, but also building the workforce of the future?
Yeah, so that would be like a 3-day question. So we'll try we'll try to give the really short version of this. One of the things I think what we hope you see come out of this plan is that there's a spot in our economy right now for everyone, right? We have record low unemployment rates, and it's a wide range of roles that we need. So there is a spot in our economy for everyone, and frankly, we need everyone to participate, and then we need to go get some other people to come and participate as well. And so I think, right, we look at this in a number of ways. There's no one easy answer. It is, how do we engage people who are in Maine but potentially not part of the labor pool right now? How do we get them into the labor pool? It's folks that maybe are stuck in a job but have other opportunities and have skill gaps. How do we help remove those barriers for them to have career mobility? Certainly, maybe for you, but this wasn't what my career agenda was, right? So I think people having the flexibility to make career moves is important for them, and giving them the control to control their own destiny is a piece, right? How do we lower that barrier for people to get those micro-credentialings, maybe that they need to move up or change jobs or change careers or find opportunities that are maybe a little bit different than where they're at today. And then how do we start in early elementary schools and make sure that those kids see a path for themselves in our economy, because there is a path for everyone, and we just need to help support people in whatever their dream is. This shouldn't be about ours, it should be about theirs.
Yeah, you mentioned micro.
Or your grandmother's, right?
Or your
grandmother's dream for you.
That's right.
Sorry, Bruce.
But Heather mentioned micro-credentialing, and we have some wonderful educators in the room who are really working tremendously hard to create systems of micro-credentials. For those who haven't heard the term before, it's a way to, in bite-sized, smaller steps, obtain a credential of value. A credential value would be a knowledge, skill, ability that allows you to take on a higher paying job. And the idea would be that as you take on micro-credentials, you can more immediately advance in your career. Hopefully that becomes a cycle that builds on itself, where you would then be able to take additional micro-credentials, have them be stackable into a degree, if that's what you want to do. It may be that the micro-credential in itself, or a series of them in your field, is exactly all you need. That's fine as well. But by building these in a stackable way, you can really find a pathway that's affordable and accessible for people. The other part of our strategy that dovetails with this, and I think that's part of the strategic thinking, we're not just saying, well, we know people need access to education and it has to be affordable. We've also looked at some of the social factors that might prevent people from having access, and that could be things like childcare, transportation, distance, and I mentioned broadband, and so those things all tie back. And so I think what's really great about this strategy, you might look at any one thing and say, well, I've heard it before, but I would say that you'll hear about it in the context of attaining a bigger mission, and that's a great example of it right there.
Can I add one more thing to that? I saw Dave Dagler earlier, so I want to make sure he gets credit for this piece. But one of the other parts of the discussion that you'll see that's a little bit different, I think, is really us starting to talk about talent development, right? We talk a lot about workforce, and that means a lot of things to a lot of people. But then when you elevate the discussion to talent, it's a very different piece, right? Talent is what attracts economic growth, right? And so workforce is one piece. We need to work really hard on that. And Bruce talked a lot, and Kathy, you talked about a bunch of things. I think we also need to be aspirational in what we're looking for and be thinking about talent. And talent isn't necessarily the PhD engineer, although we need those. Talent is about having the best person in the hotel lobby to greet the guests, right? So that experience is a very different experience than it is if you have a horrible interaction as your first step in Maine. Pick the field. We need the best people doing the best work in those fields. And so I think we need to, and we will start to try to shape this talent development and talent development as an attraction tool as part of this plan as well.
It's a really good point. We didn't talk about this question, so you can both
Sorry.
say to me, no, what I'm about to ask, it's related to this, so you can just say to me, no, like move on to the next question. A lot of this ties into the special or unique challenges of being an entrepreneur. So are there any, and so many so many businesses in Maine are 25 and under, or even 10 and under. I'll use my husband as an example. He is a sole proprietor. We are desperate to hire at least one apprentice, or he's a craftsman. We're not yet at the point of profitability. We're right on that level. What would you say you're identifying for entrepreneurs and really the small businesses that are the engines, a lot of times, of Maine?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think there are a couple factors. One is, and I thought Eric's comments and talking about LL those lessons really apply to all size companies. I thought it was a great presentation and discussion. If you think about it, LL Bean has succeeded and more than really thrived in an environment where they've defined themselves as an innovative enterprise. And one of the comments that Eric made was it's systematic and it's a lot of hard work. I think that we can provide through the academic structure and a little bit of help from the state some of the things that entrepreneurs may need to make sure that they're systematically developing their ideas and can come forward successfully. That would tie to making sure that people have a good understanding of the market. Sometimes in my career, I've run across organizations that believe because they can do something that has value, and that's not necessarily true. You want to make sure your market is there, so there's help we could give. Now, I may have misunderstood your conversation because then the next part was how do you get them the extra people they need? And one idea that we're still working on, not fully developed, a small enterprise may not be able to have a, go out and have the resources to find an apprentice. We're thinking about how we can pool that, find apprenticeships, and so there'd be a central place that you could go to find apprentice, and an apprentice could have a clearinghouse to look for opportunity as well.
A hub.
So that's an idea that's in the hopper. We're still working on
it. Joan Farini Monday talked a lot about research and development and all the exciting, and Jackson Labs, who's actually, thank you for sponsoring this portion of the program, Bigelow Labs, we could go on and on about the R&D that's going on right here in Maine, and yet consistently, year after year, investment in R&D in Maine ranks among the lowest in the country. I meant to hold up my copy that I carry with me everywhere of Measures of Growth. The latest data that Measures of Growth offers is from 2016. Maine ranked 45th out of the 50 states in terms of R&D investment. How is the plan addressing that and how we can move beyond?
Yeah, so we have a whole team of people working on kind of this R&D growth and what does that look like. And R&D growth really as it relates to commercialization, because R&D growth is one standalone measure. that's always helpful, right? R&D investment's always helpful, but when you commercialize the investment, that's when it's actually helps grow the economy in a scalable and sustainable way. And so it's interesting as we think about kind of what Maine's well positioned to do from an R&D perspective, some of those global climate issues, right? Maine is well positioned for, we have cold water, we have clean air, we have a lot of granite. There are lots of things there that are core elements that R&D will plug into. The forest products sector, the university is already doing a lot of work there. And so what is it that we can do to help facilitate those pieces? Because once you start to commercialize R&D, then you can reinvest in it. And I think it's part of this is how do you create enough revenue from the system so that you can reinvest that revenue, because that's what's needed. And you can't invest money you don't have. So how do you create kind of this cycle that allows for growth?
I'd add that
How do we do that, Bruce? No.
Well, I would add that, in a way, it's a cultural issue that companies and organizations have to recognize that ongoing innovation isn't something they just do in good times, or if they count on one person in the organization to have a brilliant idea. That's a tough way to go for long-term growth and success. And so you can develop the processes to help identify what your customers need. And hopefully that's the role of academia, to help teach people how to do that and press forward. But we really need to be cheerleaders, I think, as a state, that innovation is something that has to be embedded in every organization, not just something you do once in a while or gets cut when things slow down. It may be that you have to do just the opposite, press forward with innovation during a slowdown to make sure that when the economy improves, you're really positioned to come out of it.
So I'm guessing that most people in the audience are hearing some nuggets or all of it and thinking, this is, these are great ideas, this is progress, it's, real things that we can take action on. And then everyone's mind turns to, that's great, and how are we going to fund it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question, and who's going to do the work, right? And that's where kind of everybody in this room comes back in, and we said this, was it just last week when we had a few hundred people together having this kind of same discussion, right? Which is, there is something like 15 times the amount spent on economic development than the state spends out in the market. And so really part of the reason to be so collaborative on this program is so that local communities and local economic development groups and local businesses can see themselves in this plan and therefore take and implement pieces of it in partnership with us. And that's really how it gains traction in the marketplace. That's how it has longevity. That's how it lives through commissioners and governors and the like, right, is to get it working and implemented in a whole bunch of places. And so part of our challenge is to figure out how to project manage this in a way that gets it out into the field and into the marketplace to execute effectively. And as we develop solutions, the collective we develop solutions, that's part of the thinking, is how and where will that happen. And certainly there are going to be some pieces that we're going to have to look at as a state and say, where do we financially play as well?
I think she covered it well on that.
But I think you hit on some key points, and I'm just going to be really blunt with the words, that 10 years, you're dedicating the state and the whole group to a nonpartisan as possible approach and sustainable in terms of funding, in terms of keeping the progress going. Yeah.
I will say, though, it's a 10-year approach, and it has been very bipartisan, in my opinion, nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm. Nonpartisan.
Where's Senator King was in the room, he'd say nonpartisan. So very nonpartisan. I do think, though, you should plan that it's a dynamic document, right? We will have very clear and accountable metrics, and they'll be everywhere. If you want to know how we're achieving or not achieving, they'll be out there. And that makes some people nervous, but the reality is accountability is good because we will make real progress, and then we can show that we've made progress. And without kind of clear accountability, you can't have it either way. So what you'll see is, in some cases, I'm sure, failure to certain metrics. And then we need to regroup and say, are we doing the wrong things? Are we measuring the wrong things? Are we attempting the wrong things? And after, reset. So I think that this should be a dynamic document, right? I don't know, I came from the technology sector, and you didn't know 6 months out on your own product roadmap what it would look like. So the reality is the market's going to change, and the landscape will change a lot over the next 10 years, and we need to be prepared to shift and adjust with it. But it's not those aren't political shifts, those are market shifts. And so with kind of broad implementation and clear metrics, we're hoping to avoid some of that.
Thank you.
Did I do it to you again?
We have 2 microphones. I want to turn it over to all of you now. And we have 2 microphones. Please ask questions of Bruce and Heather, or Bruce or Heather. And if you can, please use one of the microphones. So Ann, my colleague, Ann Ball, has one. And our colleague, Rosie Van Adestein, has the other. And so we'll start with Anita, right?
Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I'm Anita St. Ange. I'm the director of Portland Adult Ed. And just wanted to know if the plan addresses the need to look at licensing and credentialing of foreign trained professionals.
Yes. Anything else? Absolutely. I think that's, it could have come up early in our conversation about workforce development. We have as one of our primary targets is how we can recognize both credentials from out of state or out of the country, and really more quickly get people credentialed. So that's an embedded part of the plan right now. I can tell you that will be in it for sure.
Thanks for being the first, Anita.
Hopefully not the last.
First and only. Oh, somebody in the back.
Hi, my name is Rob Dietz from PICA. We work with Maine Development Foundation and a lot of organizations here on the Maine Spark Initiative, supporting communications and marketing outreach. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about how the efforts that you're speaking about through the CED is connected or segues or dovetails with some of the efforts that Maine Spark is doing. Thank you.
You're probably.
Yeah. So thank you and hi. The connection between the two is strong and strengthening. We've actually as we look at skills development, we're embracing the Maine Spark goal that Yellow had up on the board earlier about getting 60% of the workforce to have credentials of value. We're currently around 46. So we'll be talking about the processes and systems that go into achieving that. There are 4 work teams inside Maine Spark that have written strategic plans, and we're getting their, actually in some cases already out, their strategic plans in the hands of the working team that's putting together the state's plan. So in the amount of time we had to get this done, we didn't want to do a lot of rework. So we're standing very much on the shoulders of what was accomplished in Maine Spark. I'm very involved in Maine Spark personally. I haven't seen anything that conflicts with or doesn't build on what Maine Spark is doing.
You'll see that a couple of times in the plan as well, outside of just Maine Spark, which is if there's already somebody, in some cases, right, nobody was working on it, so a group formed to work on it. And so, you'll see the plan kind of support that work and figure out how to shine a positive spotlight on that work and figure out what else we can do to round that work out to the extent that there's anything that needs to be helped. So that would be the goal, certainly, is to, again, in this resource-constrained world that we live in, if there's already good work going on, how do you just shine the light and keep that good work going and kind of stay out of the way of that good work, but integrate it into the other pieces?
And scale it and replicate it.
That's right. Yeah.
I think we have a question in the back.
Yes, so my name's Guy Piper. I live in Monmouth, Maine, small town between Augusta and Lewiston. We have one bank and we have one credit union. We got 7,000 people that live in Monmouth. We got notice from our bank in town. They may close November 21st. And they're reviewing it now. But if they do close, what would you recommend us to do, or recommendations to do now before? Hopefully they'll stay, but I don't know if this is the beginning of a cycle where they're going to move different banks out of different towns or what. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I guess you're the bank guy.
I'm a bank guy? Okay. I think some business cycles are happening outside the context of the economic plan because banks are competing more and more against online bankers, e-bankers, and then it's questioning this whole issue of how much bricks and mortar actually exist in a town. I still go into the bank and I want to be greeted and known by name when I come in. But there's a whole generation of folks that are coming up and thinking in terms of just say, well, I can do everything I need online and I don't need to go in. So I do hope, I do think it's a competitive issue in the banking industry. My hope would be that some of the banks that still have a philosophy of having bricks and mortar are going to see that as an opportunity. You may have to do more online, and hopefully the bank you have provides that opportunity for you. I will tell you, I don't have a strategy embedded in this to deal with that particular issue.
Dan's got one.
Trying to do negotiations, like instead of just from 10 to 3, we might want to, have the bank over from 10 to 6. That way they would get more foot traffic, because that was one of the issues they talked with us on was the foot traffic. So we're trying to work with it, and hopefully that's the ingenuity both of us working together, the
Yeah.
town and them. Hopefully we come up with and also too in Monmouth. In Monmouth, we've got a lot of elderly citizens, and they can't afford to drive to Bangor or drive to Lewiston. And we've also made a recommendation they might want to put some type of banking thing like they have in Manchester and through one of the other banks. And the bank is Bangor Savings, and they have outstanding individuals. We got an outstanding manager there, and hopefully between negotiations, hopefully the bank can stay there. And yeah, that's a good point, online banking, but we do have a lot of elderly people in town, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Annie?
Hey, thank you. My name is Annie Graham, and I'm a nurse practitioner, and along with a whole bunch of other hats that I've worn. I was at the American Nurses Association meeting, Maine chapter, in Freeport yesterday, and one of the biggest concerns they had was that nursing programs, we know there's a looming crisis of nursing workforce. One of the dilemmas is we're all graying out. Majority of the nurses in hospital systems are over 55. So the dilemma they're facing is that we have a lot of nursing programs, and they're turning students away, potential students away, because we have no faculty. There's a real dilemma bringing faculty in, and so does your plan look at issues around healthcare workforce, but particularly educating nurses for the future?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I know there was actually even some legislation in the last session that addressed some of that, and Commissioner Lambert is very, very involved in that piece. I think, when you think about infrastructural workforce versus kind of what I think of as more private sector type workforce, education, I know Commissioner Macon and I saw Mary Herman earlier, right, there's a real concern about teacher shortage, and right, if we need this talented, skilled workforce and we want to have a spot for everyone in this economy, how do we get them ready, right? We've got to keep them healthy, and we've got to get them trained and educated. And so those are pieces that you'll see, right, as it comes out of this. But certainly there's no magic to that, right? It's a long-term challenge that's much bigger than kind of the work that you'll see. But you'll see steps here to try to make that better and encourage kind of that work. But I do think it's a big challenge that you won't see. There's no aha moment to this as it relates to solving some of those broader problems. It's very fundamental steps to how could we do that.
Well, I've been told that I'm over. In my former life, I feel like we're on the 207 set. It struck me like halfway through this. In my former life, like the producer would be screaming in my ear. So I think we have to let that be the last word. We could go on and on and on. We really need like a 2-day summit on this, right? But I want to thank you both so much, knowing how much is on your plate, for taking the time and joining us, and we can't wait. All of us in this room can't wait to partner with you and roll up our sleeves and get into it once the plan is out and be your partners in it.